I will begin where every good conspiracy begins, under the murmur of fluorescent lights at 2 in the morning, alone on the 18th floor of an office tower where the carpet smells like toner and lemon cleaner. And the thermostat is always set to an aggressively neutral 68 degrees. That is where I sat holding a flash drive, full of screen recordings, keycard logs, and calendar invites with coded subject lines, waiting for the moment when my cheating wife would finally figure out that I had figured it out weeks before. The ridiculous part is that none of this was supposed to be epic. I am not a spy. I am a middle manager who color codes spreadsheets, grills burgers in a backyard that has a maple tree and a squeaky swing, and buys bulk paper towels at a warehouse store because a family that spills together stays together. My sense of comedy used to be dad jokes and a perfect impression of our neighbor's small dog. Then betrayal walked into my living room wearing a silk blouse that smelled like cologne I did not own, and conspiracy theory began to feel like a practical life skill. The first clue was not lipstick or a mysterious receipt. It was an avocado toast crumb. That morning, my wife swore she had eaten breakfast at home, but there were crumbs shaped like the county logo of a coffee chain that only exists in the lobby of my office. She swore she had stopped by there after a yoga class, swore the drip coffee was terrible, swore everything except the thing that would have hurt less if she had simply said it. I smiled and nodded because in American marriages we pretend to accept the small lies to avoid the big fights. I drove to work pretending to be the reasonable husband, the family man whose weekends are built of soccer practices, church parking lot traffic, Sunday night meal prep, and those endless school fundraiser texts. But during lunch I walked past the office of my boss, a man whose watch cost what my sedan cost, and I noticed a second coffee cup on the credenza. My boss drinks espresso cut with an alarming amount of sparkling water, which I consider a misdemeanor against both coffee and bubbles. The second cup was the oat milk latte my wife had posted about in a story for her wellness blog. The same order, the same heart drawn in the foam, the same sprinkle of cinnamon. The line between coincidence and pattern is a thin thread that either breaks or turns into a noose. I did not pull it then. I simply watched. I watched as the Human Resources compliance poster on the wall next to his office changed from last year's edition to a new one with an extra bullet about fraternization and professional boundaries. I watched as my wife's calendar, which she pretended to keep private, started to include vague entries with titles like client alignment and deep work. And I watched as my boss added after-hours meetings labeled strategic improvisations. I watched as the building's security logs revealed that their badges entered at the same minute at least 3 nights in a row. People call this cheating. Corporate training calls it a conflict of interest. My heart called it a small earthquake moving across the plates of my life, shifting family photographs on mantels and knocking down everything that looked stable. I needed to know, and I needed to know in a way that would be undeniable when it was time for revenge. So I did the American thing. I upgraded the doorbell camera, then installed a smart thermostat that, coincidentally, includes a motion sensor that does not sleep. I updated our router and set up a parental control profile for 2 responsible adults, which is a polite way of saying that I track devices the way an air traffic controller tracks planes. All of this, I told myself, was simply in case there was a burglary. There was a burglary. It just did not involve strangers. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday that smelled like rain, I watched my wife put on a navy dress that she reserves for interviews and funerals. She said she was meeting her friend for a late dinner. She said the friend was going through a breakup. She said she might be home late and that I should not wait up. My grandmother used to say that when someone tells you not to wait up, you should boil water for tea because the truth will need something hot to sit in. I waited anyway. I waited at a coffee shop across the street from the office because I had noticed that the building's motion sensors registered activity in my boss's office after 10 o'clock whenever her navy dress appeared. I am aware that this sounds like I am a man unraveling. Perhaps I was. Perhaps betrayal makes a person turn the mundane into a case file, and the normal into a map of secret tunnels. At 10:13, she used her badge. At 10:14, he used his. At 10:16, the shades in his office lowered, the same way they always do when he shares slides that are supposedly confidential. I walked into the lobby with the cup of decaf that no one in America admits to drinking, nodded at the security guard who knows my name because I am a creature of habit, and took the elevator up. I stepped into a corridor that hummed with the air conditioner's steady exhale. I stood at the frosted glass wall of his corner office and saw shapes moving like a movie you should not be watching. You can call it infidelity. You can call it cheating. You can call it a story as old as offices. I call it the moment my life turned from a straight line into a Rube Goldberg machine. I did not barge in. I did not shout. I took out my phone, like any American who has learned from true crime podcasts that the world only believes you if it can be streamed. The recording captured shadows and angles and the unmistakable intimacy of people who are sure they are safe. Betrayal loves fluorescent light. It imagines that the light makes it clean. I walked away with the kind of evidence that does not require commentary. And because I am a man who writes boring security protocols, I also pulled the digital access logs the next morning. I sat in my car in the parking lot, and I laughed, not the laughter of a person who has won, but the laughter of a person who has located the absurdity in his own narrative. I knew weeks before she knew I knew. The question waiting like a loaded line break was what kind of revenge would honor the ridiculousness of a cheating wife who chose an office as a stage and a boss as a co-star. If life insisted on parody, then parody would be my instrument. I did not confront her. I made pancakes. The boys wanted chocolate chips shaped like baseballs, and I made those because family rituals carry you like a raft when the river decides to misbehave. I drove to work whistling a theme song from a sitcom because irony was the only seasoning I could taste. The American thing, again, is not to explode. It is to curate. I curated a collection of details that would allow the truth to present itself like a gallery opening. My boss held a weekly meeting called Strategic Alignment, where the slides pulsed with buzzwords. During that meeting, I began to plant my own words, not in the slides, but in the room. I said things like, "The most dangerous problem is the one that thinks it is a solution." And I watched him blink, because he is a man who believes that blinking is a sign of weakness. I asked him about his wife. He said they were solid and that couples who last long learn to communicate like co-founders. I thought about my cheating wife texting under the table and decided that co-founders can be very strange. The conspiracy arrived when the cleaning crew told me that someone had asked for extra desk sanitizer specifically for the corner office, even though the corner office had been marked as out of use for late nights due to reduced energy policy. I am not saying the Environmental Stewardship Committee enabled infidelity, but the sign that read, "Save Power After 10," felt like the punchline to a joke that God had written for my private amusement. I ordered a box of novelty stickers that said Employee of the Month and began to leave one under the keyboard of anyone who looked directly into my eyes for more than 3 seconds. People thought I was making morale improvements. I was mapping nerves. When my wife started humming a pop song that the building lobby plays every time the elevator door opens, I knew the soundscape had seeped into our home. I began to narrate my evenings like an audiobook for one listener who did not know she was the audience. I described how proud I felt when my boss thanked me for pulling the Q2 data ahead of schedule. I mentioned that the corner office had a beautiful sunset when the blinds were up. I talked about badge access and the hilarious way the motion sensors confuse tall plants with human movement. She said I was being weird. I said, "Weird is what happens when betrayal turns a husband into a stand-up comedian who performs for a single critic every night over grilled chicken and salad." She laughed. The laugh sounded hollow. Infidelity is a hollow drum. Hit it and it makes noise, but nothing fills. I had a plan, and it required patience and the American knack for paperwork. I filed a request with the Ethics Hotline to review after-hours access in executive offices, not as an accusation, simply as a compliance tune-up. I drafted a new security patch for our building software that required dual sign-off for blinds to lower after 10, because transparency is a value printed on our lobby wall, and I felt mischievous. I asked the facilities manager to test a new feature that triggered a small chime when a door remained locked for more than 4 hours from the inside. I told him it would promote safety. He said I was a national treasure. I bought flowers for my wife on a Tuesday with no occasion because I wanted to watch her navigate the guilt. She hugged me and said I deserved someone who sees me. She used present tense, which told me that she did not see me now. We ate pasta while my sons debated who would win in a fight between a superhero and a dinosaur. I told them that the dinosaur always wins because it is older, and secretly I wanted age to win because my marriage was older than this ridiculous plot line. But betrayal is young and believes in improv. On Friday, my boss announced a new initiative called The Night Shift, a clever rebranding of the way he demanded more hours without paying overtime. He said the company would reward creativity demonstrated after standard hours. He looked at me with friendly authority. He looked at my wife later, I am sure, with something else. I smiled and asked if creativity included performance art. He said he did not follow. I said he would. That weekend, we attended a backyard barbecue where my neighbor insisted on telling me about the latest podcast episode that proved birds are not real. I nodded because conspiracy theory had moved from my private pain to the public lawn chair. I found myself analyzing the logistics of being a bird-shaped drone while also sampling potato salad and wondering how one scripts a reveal that does not break one's children. I wanted revenge, but I did not want collateral damage. In movies, revenge is a clean montage. In a family, it is slow and full of dishes. On Sunday night, as my cheating wife folded laundry and pretended we were normal, I set up a calendar invite called Moon Landing for Wednesday at 9 in the evening. I invited my boss and my wife and marked the location as the Office of Strategic Improvisations. I attached a document labeled Emergency Continuity Plan, page 11. Page 11 is a clause I had written months ago when I still believed in mutual accountability. It states that in the event of a breach of confidentiality by senior leadership, any employee has the right to present evidence directly to the board, bypassing the chain of command. The clause had been approved because no one reads page 11. I was counting on that. The countdown had started, and I was the only one who could hear it. Wednesday came dressed as a normal day that had shaved badly. The children argued about cereal. The dog found a sock and declared it a treasure. My wife kissed my cheek without meeting my eyes. I drove to work and practiced saying everything without raising my voice, because Americans love the person who keeps calm while setting off fireworks. At 8:59, I entered the conference room we never use because the video system is too good. It shows pores. I had placed a small sign on the door that read, Lunar Briefing, and the kind of colleague who collects novelty ties stopped to ask if we were doing a space theme. I told him that we were doing a gravity lesson. The video system blinked on at 9. My wife and my boss walked in together but 2 seconds apart, which made me think of those spy movies where the agents act like strangers until the mission begins. The blinds in the corner office remained up, thanks to my new patch, and the city laid itself out like a witness. On the screen, the board dialed in from their homes, faces framed by art that suggested taste and prosperity. I thanked everyone for making time at an unusual hour and said that the emergency continuity plan allowed employees to present concerns in the interest of organizational integrity. My boss smiled and said he appreciated engagement. I said I had evidence of a breach of confidentiality with operational implications. I plugged in the flash drive. The first video was not the one from the frosted glass. I am not cruel. The first video was a series of time-stamped entries and exits that showed a pattern. I narrated it in the tone of a nature documentary because parody kept my hands from shaking. At 10:13, a female badge. At 10:14, an executive badge. At 10:16, blinds down. At 12:36, both out. Repeat. My wife said this was a profound misunderstanding. My boss said he often worked late and that women on staff sometimes sought mentorship. I said the mentorship seemed very hands-on. I clicked. The second video showed the corner office from the reflection on the neighboring skyscraper's mirrored surface, a faint but unmistakable mathematics of movement. The board leaned forward. My boss's jaw tightened. My wife stared at me with a look that I recognized from our wedding day when she realized I had remembered our vows without note cards. It was the look of a person who sees that the other person has done a thing thoroughly. I said that this was a matter of infidelity, a matter of cheating, and a matter of misuse of resources. I said that while the affair itself belonged to the category of personal betrayal, its location belonged to the company. I said the corners of our lives are not vacuum sealed, and when family and work mix in the wrong blender, everyone gets a taste of something sour. My boss attempted a speech about privacy. I reminded him of the policy he had signed about after-hours office use. I put up the policy like a museum piece and used my laser pointer, which I had brought because revenge is definitionally better with props. Then I placed a printed copy of page 11 on the table. The board chair, a woman who had probably reverse-engineered every man she ever met, spoke first. She thanked me for the careful presentation. She asked my boss if he had anything to add. He said words that sounded like leadership but smelled like panic. She muted him with a click that felt like a small mercy to the rest of us. She asked my wife if she had any comment. My wife said our marriage had become distant, that she felt invisible, that she never meant to hurt anyone, that betrayal happens when loneliness finds an unlocked door. I did not correct her metaphor. I simply said that doors at this company lock automatically. Then I pivoted because the plan was never to scorch earth. The plan was to tell the truth in a way that allowed consequences to dress themselves. I said that I would be taking personal leave to care for my family during a transition. I said that I had already spoken to a counselor who works with families after infidelity. I said that I expected the company to apply its ethics policy consistently. The board chair nodded like a person who has seen an avalanche and knows how to remain still until the snow finishes moving. She dismissed my boss from the call and asked him to wait in the hallway. She asked my wife if she wanted to remain. My wife said yes, then looked at me with a face that carried 10 years of shared grocery lists. The chair thanked me again and said the company would address leadership issues separately. The call ended. My boss, outside the door, stared at me as if his calendar had betrayed him. He said I had ended my career. I told him that I had merely changed the genre. I told him that life had decided we were all in a satire, and that in satire the person who thinks he is a lead often discovers he is a lesson. He reached for the doorknob to his corner office. The blinds stayed up, and the very public view of a very private mess shone back at him through the mirror of the adjacent tower. He said he would sue me for defamation. I said truth is an absolute defense. He said I had hacked him. I said compliance is not hacking. Then something miraculous and ridiculous happened. The facility's chime, the one that pings after 4 hours of a locked door, sounded from his office because the pilot I had started still ran, and the system had registered last week's marathon mentoring session and had replayed the alert as part of the test. He looked smaller by an inch. I did not feel triumph. I felt the ache of a person who has carried a heavy box up the stairs and finally sets it down. After the meeting, my wife and I drove home in a silence that had weight. American streets at night have their own orchestra, a steady wash of tires and the occasional trumpet of a siren. We passed the high school where we used to sit in the bleachers and make fun of the announcer who mispronounced names. We passed the ice cream place where my sons believe the owner can fix anything with sprinkles. At home, I put the boys to bed with a story about a dinosaur who loses his tail and finds it again by telling the truth. When the house finally exhaled, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table that has held holidays and the predictable disasters of pasta sauce. She apologized in the ways people apologize when they believe words can rewind film. She said she had felt small and that attention made her feel big. She said love is a verb and ours had become a checklist. She said she never meant to break the family, that infidelity was not a plan but a drift. I said that betrayal always calls itself a drift until it hits a rock. I did not raise my voice. I said the words that upset me most were not the ones we would tell lawyers, but the ones we would eventually tell our sons. I said we would tell them the truth without theater, because when you make a child the audience, you turn pain into entertainment, and nothing good grows from that. I told her I would not perform rage. I would not spiral into a conspiracy where everything is a sign that she is still lying. I would not stage a public shaming tour. My revenge would be small and accurate. It would be a boundary drawn with a pen you can see from across the street. The next morning, the board placed my boss on leave pending investigation. The company announced a pledge to recommit to standards that had always been written on paper and rarely tested in practice. I packed my desk into one cardboard box like every American layoff scene, except I was not laid off. I had asked for leave. People came by to say that I had done the brave thing. I nodded as if bravery had been my intention and not simply the only move that felt honest. On my way out, I stopped by the lobby coffee stand. I ordered 2 drinks and paid with exact change. I walked to the corner of the plaza where the mirrored tower displays our small movements like a cathedral of glass, and I set the latte down on the bench where pigeons conduct their unlicensed council meetings. In another life, I might have staged a speech there about justice and revenge. In this life, I threw the latte into the trash, and I kept the drip coffee because nothing about this story deserved a heart drawn in foam. At home, we divided calendars. We divided furniture that had never offended anyone. We talked about counseling. We agreed that a pause might be kinder than a performance of reconciliation. Our sons asked why we were making charts, and we told them the grown-up version of the dinosaur story, that sometimes grown-ups forget they are on the same team, and that the best way to win is to admit when someone has fumbled and not pretend the ball is still in the air. My wife cried without words. I did not comfort her, not because I wanted her to feel pain, but because I had finally learned the difference between mercy and denial. Weeks passed. The company replaced my boss with an interim leader who speaks in complete sentences. Our friends tried to place us in genres. Some thought this was a tragedy. Some thought it was reality television. One neighbor said it was poetic justice, which is how Americans say they are satisfied that the math of the universe is not entirely broken. I took the boys to a game where the home team lost in the final inning, and they learned that losing does not end the world. It just makes the walk to the parking lot slower. On Sunday mornings, I started running. If there is a conspiracy in the human body, it is that the heart survives even when it has been mistaken about what it was protecting. One evening, my wife asked if I would consider trying again after time apart. I told her I would consider many things. I told her that forgiveness is not a password and that the door it opens is not the door back into the same room. I told her that I loved the family we built and I loved the version of her who could tell the truth quickly. I told her the version of me who knew weeks before she knew I knew would not disappear just because we declared a reset. She asked what I wanted. I said I wanted peace. And I wanted the boys to understand that adults can end things without ending each other. She said that sounded like a sermon. I said it sounded like a plan. There is a final twist, of course, because life respects symmetry. On the day I returned my building access badge, The security guard called me by name and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a note written in neat block letters. It said, "You were right about the blinds. The city looks better when nothing is hidden." I looked up at the mirrored tower. In the reflection, I saw a man holding an empty envelope and a cup of plain coffee. He looked like a person who had stepped out of a satire and into a quieter story. I still say the words revenge and betrayal and cheating and infidelity because they belong to the taxonomy of what happened. I also say family because we still are one, rearranged. The conspiracy did not end with handcuffs or fire. It ended with a policy change, a cardboard box, a calendar with different colored highlighter marks, and a husband who learned that knowing early does not make the pain less. It only gives you more time to decide who you will be when the lights come on. And when they did, I chose to stand there, fully lit, and speak in a voice that did not tremble. My cheating wife heard me. My children heard me. The city heard me. The blinds stayed up.